Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the garage, where this week I have got a huge build. In fact, you could say it's almost like building two bikes in one, because it is two bikes in one. This is a Schwinn Tango Tandem, and I'm honestly not sure how I'm even going to be able to hold this up because it is so misweighted, it's unreal. In fact, bear with me while I deal with this problem. Right, now I've got that up there, I can tell you a little bit about it. As I say, this is a Schwinn Tango Tandem, and as you can see, it is a beach cruiser style tandem. Now, I bought this a couple of months ago, once again from the John Pye auction site, and for this frame and another tandem frame, which I think was a Barracuda California frame, I paid around 20 quid for both frames delivered. No one else bid on the auction, clearly no one wanted them, and I think they went for 4 quid, the actual auction finish price. But once you added the buyer's premium and then a little bit of postage on top of that, yeah, it comes to about 20-25 quid. So we're talking £12.50 per frame, and I think this is an absolutely beautiful bike. Now, I'm not really into tandems, and this is more just a bit of a fun project, because initially I had bought this with the idea of riding it from London to Paris with Jimmy as either my stoker or the captain. I hadn't actually figured out which way round we were going to go. However, that was the plan when it was just Jimmy and I going London to Paris. However, there's now 11 of us, and the rest of the guys are all on hyper-fast road bikes. So we thought it'd be a little bit silly for the two of us to do it on tandems. But fear not, we will have some adventures on this bike, and you will see it, I'm sure, on the channel very soon. But yeah, it is a stunning looking bike. It's got some really awesome features on it, actually, and there's going to be a little bit of work to be done on this bike because it is currently set up for rim brakes. It's got some V-brakes at the back. It didn't come with a fork, but I'll go into that in a moment. But the work that I'm going to have to do on this is that I'm changing it from rim brakes to disc brakes, and not only disc brakes, hydraulic disc brakes. So that will be a task in itself, but I'm looking forward to the challenge. However, in terms of tandem features, this one is pretty well spec'd, at least when it comes to the rear crank here, because ordinarily on a tandem bike, or at least on the lower end tandem bikes, both the pilot and the stoker have to pedal at the same time, and if the stoker at the back or the pilot at the front wants to take a rest, well, then they have to just let their legs be taken or take their feet off the pedals, because both chain rings turn at the same time. However, with this bike, it has what's known as an independent pedal system. So this crank will turn here if the pilot is pedaling from the front, but equally it will engage to turn the crank as well. But at any point, the stoker can stop pedaling at the back and the chainring will continue to spin. Now, I think that is a cracking little feature and should come in fairly handy, because this is a beach cruiser style bike. It is not a thoroughbred racer, and because of that, it is a little bit on the weighty side, and that does mean that you're probably going to want to take a few breaks every now and then from pedaling. This bike, just the frame and the cranks, weighs in at 11.5 kilos. So that's before I put anything onto it, 11.5 kilos. Now, bearing in mind that it is effectively two bikes in one, so I guess you can't really expect it to be too light, but 11.5 kilos I thought was fairly weighty. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this doesn't come with a fork, but I have bought a separate fork which does have posts for V-brakes on it, but it also has a lug here for a disc brake caliper as well. I had it specially cut down to size for the headset as well. I'm going to leave the lugs on for the V-brakes just in case I ever decide to change it back, or if the hydraulic thing doesn't really work out. So I will leave those on there. But I am really looking forward to this build. It's going to be a real fun one. Again, it's not particularly functional, this bike. It is a beach cruiser. It's meant to be ridden for fun, not for speed, but it is going to be a fantastic build, and I'm really looking forward to putting it together. And so the first thing I'm going to do, I think, is get this fork on, which means putting the brand new headset in. Now, one thing I will say before I get started, because this is obviously about 1.5 times longer than the average bike, it is a little bit long for my garage here. So when it comes to the time to put the wheels on, I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do. We might end up with half the bike off camera, or I may just transfer the whole bike outside to finish the build out there. but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Right, so before putting the nice spangly new chromified headset in, I just want to point out that the fork didn't come with a crown race, but Handley, the XLC headset that I've bought, does actually come with its own crown race, which fits perfectly on the 1 1/8 inch steerer tube. Now that needs smacking down, which I will do with my handy Super B crown race setting tool. This is a TB 1938. I believe there is a 1939 which does 1.5 inch steerers for things like mountain bikes, but this one is only 1 1/8 inch, as I say, so this is perfect. Now, I did a video previously about setting a crown race and taking it off. I didn't actually have this tool at the time, and so I used a piece of rigid PVC plastic piping, which worked just as well. So if you don't have the really expensive crown race setting tool, then you can always settle for just a piece of PVC pipe that you can pick up from your local hardware store fairly cheaply. But for now, I'm going to get the crown race on and then get the headset installed. There we go, that's on there nice and flush. Now in terms of setting the headset cups into the frame, I've previously used 2 pieces of wood with a bit of threaded metal through the middle of them, which then acted basically as a sandwich. You use a couple of nuts either end, tighten them up, and it compresses everything in and it squeezes the headset cups in. However, I have since bought this very cheap headset installation tool from AliExpress. I think this cost me about £5. It may not be the best quality, but it has done a good number of headset cups thus far and hasn't failed me once, so I'm going to stick with it for now. It's a pretty good little tool and it does the job perfectly. So the cups are installed, now it's time to get the threaded fork. I bought this from Bankrupt Bike Parts and I actually asked them to cut the steerer down and add a little bit of the thread on the top for me. Now I do have a thread cutting tool that I got recently, but I decided that for this bike and on the first occasion I'll get them to do it professionally, cut it down square and do the threading for me. So I took all the measurements for the headset with the cups installed, and so I'm hoping that this should now fit up perfectly with everything in place, with just enough thread at the top to fit the locking nut on top. So this is going to be the first fingers crossed moment, and the second one will be fitting the hydraulic brakes at the back. So yeah, let's just hope I've got all of these measurements correct and this goes up and through and just sits with just enough thread above the cups. Let's see. Right, well I don't mean to boast or anything, but that is pretty much spot on with the measurements, so I'm very happy that I got that right. That was the first squeaky bum moment, but that has gone perfectly, and that fork is now spinning beautifully. So yeah, very happy with that. And while we're up the front, we may as well continue with this brand new chromified quill type stem. So yeah, let's get that installed. Right, well that's as far down as the quill wants to go into the steerer for the moment. I'm not sure exactly how high I'm going to want this quill at the front. Until I get the bike down, the wheels on, it's going to be difficult to say. So I'll leave that there for now. I may have to clean out the inside of the steerer tube slightly. It feels like there might be some swarf or something up in there that's stopping that going down any further. But anyway, we'll leave that for now and we will... Right, okay, change of plan, because I realised that to go any further with this project, I really need to get the handlebars installed so I can put the brake levers on and the gear shifter. Now this is effectively a 1x7 with no front derailleur and 7 gears on the cassette at the back. So if I wanted to go any further with this, as I say, I need to put the handlebars on, start running cables, put the wheels on, and then start attaching the rear derailleur, chain and everything like that. But that can only be done once the handlebars are on. So I took some drastic action, because once I took this fork back off again, I realised that the stem of the quill was just so long that there was no way that I could get it down inside the steerer tube of the fork. So as I say, I had to take some drastic measures, and I've ended up cutting about 4 inches off the bottom of this quill. Now, the way I did this was by removing the threaded nut here and removing the threaded piece of metal that effectively acts as a very long bolt. And then I took an angle grinder to it and cut it at an angle that this slotted nut would still push against to expand out in the steerer of the fork. And the benefit of that is now that this will push all the way down, or at least as far down as I'll need it. That is probably a little better looking. There's about 1.5 inches left on top of the headset there, and that works much better. So with that now done, I can start installing the handlebars, and as I say, I can then start getting all of the levers and the cables and everything like that run. Now, part of the problem that I face here is that the brakes have come pre-terminated into the brake calipers, and clearly this is not long enough to run from the front of the bike to the back. So what I'm going to have to do is use some brand new hose. So I'm going to have to take this apart, re-terminate back into the lever, and then run the hose the entire length of the bike to the back for the rear brake. Now, that poses a few challenges because it means I am going to have to bleed the hose completely, because the hose that I've got is obviously devoid of oil. So that's going to cause a bit of an issue. The front brake I'm hoping won't cause that many issues, because that is only short that runs from the handlebars down to the brake caliper. So this pre-terminated hose should work there. So a few issues yet to face, and I haven't even started with converting the rear of the bike to disc brakes rather than the cable actuated rim brakes at the moment. But lots to do. I'm going to get on with putting the handlebars in and then start running some hoses and cables. Okay, so that is the brake levers and the thumb shifter on. However, I had a horrible feeling this would be the case, and I've just found out that it is the case that this shift cable is too short. I believe that this is 2.3 meters long, so I need to take it out and replace it with this Clark's, which I believe is 2.5 meters long, which gives me an extra 20 centimeters. That should be just about all I need. The cable reaches to the end of the chainstay, so I'm hoping that that extra 20 centimeters should be enough to just get it out of the end and connect into the derailleur. If it doesn't, then I might be a bit stuck. I might have to try and get hold of an extra long shift cable, like a 3 meter long shift cable or something. So let's replace the cable with this slightly longer one. Yeah, it is an extra literally 20 centimeters, maybe even 15 centimeters longer. So I think I'm going to look for another cable to see what I've got in my little bag of tricks, because I'm concerned that the extra 15 centimeters just isn't going to be enough for what I need. Okay, none of those cables are long enough, and as I say, the 2.5 meter one that I had, I think is probably going to be just too short, so I don't want to waste my time threading that all the way through, putting the cable housings in and getting it all the way to the back of the bike, only to find that it's too short. So in the meantime, I have gone on to the website of my local bike shop in Bishop Stortford, Highway Cycles. Big shout out to them. I've used them a number of times. Cracking service in there, great bunch of guys. So I've gone onto their website and they have a 3 meter long Shimano shift cable, and it is specifically, funnily enough, called a Tandem shift cable. So they've got one in stock. Unfortunately, it's too late for me to go and get it this evening, but I have ordered it and I will go and pick it up tomorrow morning so I can then start running the shift cable. But in the meantime, I can start running the brake cable hoses and get on with the single cable for the rear derailleur tomorrow. So interestingly, having just put the front brake lever on, here in the UK we use the right hand brake as the front brake, as opposed to in Europe and America, I believe, where they use the left hand brake lever for the front. And it just shows that clearly these brakes were set up for either the European or American market, because this brake hose is a lot longer for the right hand side than the one that is going to go on the left hand side. It doesn't really matter anyway, because I'm going to be cutting them down, but it's just a useful point of note that if you are going to buy some of these cheaper hydraulic brake calipers and levers yourself, that you might have to cut the hoses down and re-bleed them yourself, unless you're happy to have them the opposite way round, in which case have at it, and you don't need to cut it or re-bleed. But yeah, let's get this one cut down now and attached to the front fork. Right, okay, front brake is on and it still needs to be bled, but it's working. However, it does feel a little bit spongy, but that's fine. We can sort that out in a moment. I've also now terminated the new hose into the rear brake caliper, and I'm gonna run what I hope is a long enough hose all the way down to the end of the bike, where I will then deal with the issue of converting this to a disc brake bike from the V brakes that are on here at the moment. Right, beautiful. That brake hose is more than long enough, so that's absolutely perfect. Now I need to work on turning this bike into a disc brake bike by using this little device here that I got from AliExpress. Now this little thing is designed to go around the seat stay at the back of the bike, and then this slots into the dropout of the bike. Now the only problem with this is that I am going to have to modify the axle of the wheel slightly, and I'm going to have to remove a spacer to be able to fit this inside the frame and next to the wheel. So that shouldn't be too difficult. It should just be a case of removing a nut, taking the washer off, and then replacing the nut again. But more of a concern at the moment is just how wide this aperture is, because the seat stay at the back of the bike is actually quite narrow, so I'm a bit worried that this isn't going to tighten down onto the seat stay properly. But I've got a little bit of a plan with that, but I'll see how this goes on first, and then maybe we'll try something else. Right, so I've got it fitted now, and as you can see, this bit just sits around the rear seat stay. This is very loose here, so that's obviously not going to give us a particularly safe amount of braking. So what I'm going to do is pack this out here, or wrap around here, some 3M helicopter tape, which will take up a lot of that space, and then we should be able to get a nice tight clamp down on top of there, and then hold that in place to keep it secure. Right, so this is the 3M helicopter tape, and if you've not seen this before, it is effectively just a malleable, thick, sticky back plastic, as they used to say on Blue Peter, and you generally run it around areas of your frame that are going to get chipped with stones, or are going to come into contact with other items that would otherwise scratch them or take the paintwork off. However, I think this is the perfect remedy to wrap around the rear seat stay to hold that conversion adapter in place. And not only will this protect the frame from being scratched by that adapter, but as I said earlier, it will also bulk it out and give us a nice tight pinch on it. So I'm going to get cutting this now and start wrapping. Okay, so that is the helicopter tape wrapped around there now. And that makes a very nice tight pinch on there now. And actually, because this is rubberized as well, that's even more helpful in not letting it move around. So I can now reattach our piece here, screw that in, and that should be nice and tight. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, that is the sketchiest thing you've ever seen. In fact, this device alone is probably the sketchiest thing you've ever seen, and now adding that 3M helicopter tape makes it even worse. However, do bear in mind that this is a beach cruiser style tandem, not a racing tandem, and so whoever I go out on this with, it will most likely be Jimmy for the first couple of rides, but whoever I go out on this with, we're not going to be doing Tom Pidcock style descents down Alpe d'Huez, the Galibier, or Mont Ventoux or anything like that. It's going to be a nice steady cruiser, and so with most of the braking coming from the front anyway, this is going to be perfectly safe at the back. We'll obviously take it slow the first few times we use it, and I will keep you updated on how it works, but I don't have too many concerns about how this is going to work at the back. I think it will be just perfect. So let's get this adapter piece put on, and then I can set about taking that spacer out of the back wheel to make it fit with this in. Okay, that is lovely and tight in there now, and so I can set about sorting the back wheel out. Now, first and foremost, I want to point out these wheels. These are a beautiful set of white rims that I got from eBay, I think, for about 30 quid. So I was more than pleased with them, and obviously it goes with the colour scheme. However, let me show you this little spacer that I'm talking about and the problem that it's causing. Okay, so the issue I currently have is that because of this spacer here sandwiched between the cup and cone bearings and this nut, This is making the axle just too wide to fit into the dropouts and accommodate the new adapter for the brake disc conversion. So I need to undo this nut, remove that spacer, and then put the nut back on, and then hopefully it should be narrow enough to fit between the dropouts with the adapter plate sandwiched in there as well. However, it's very late in the evening now, so I think I'm going to put this down, put it to one side and leave it until tomorrow. And then when I come back in the morning, we can finish getting the rest of the bike done and finally get it out for a test ride. So I'm going to leave that here and I will see you in the morning. Okay, it is a new day, and with a new day comes new problems, unfortunately, because having fettled and played around with that little conversion adapter all morning today, trying to make it fit and then trying to put the wheel in and get the brake caliper on top, I just couldn't get them to match up. Either the brake caliper was too high and it was missing the rotor, or I got it too low and the rotor was rubbing on the inside of the caliper at the top of the caliper. So I very nearly gave up on this entire project because I thought, well, if I can't get the hydraulic brakes working, well, then I'm a little bit knackered. But Mama didn't raise no quitter, and I decided that before throwing this back into the garage and never wanting to look at it ever again, actually I could swap the rear hydraulic caliper out back for the V-brakes that were on there in the first place. So that's what I've decided to do. So now I will have a mismatch of brakes. I'll have hydraulic brakes at the front, which again is fine because most of the braking will come from the front. And then at the back, I will have cable actuated rim brakes. Now, luckily with the wheels that I bought, although they are set up for disc brakes, they are 6-bolt style disc brake hubs. They do have a rim that can be used for rim brakes as well. So I'm quite lucky in that that shouldn't be a problem at the back. I should be able to use that rear wheel with the rim brakes. So I'm now going to get on with that. However, as you can see, I've now put the wheels on the bike, the handlebars are on, and it's all getting a little bit cumbersome and big for the garage here. It's difficult for me to move around it. I need to put the rear derailleur on, I need to run cable housings and cables, put the chain on and stuff like that. So for the rest of this, because I don't have much room in here, I'm going to move outside. But because of that, I live fairly close to a main road and it does get quite noisy outside. So the rest of this video may well be a voiceover, so I apologise for that, but I will still give you a full rundown of what I've done and then we'll have a proper good look at the bike when it's finished. Right, let's get out to the garden. Okay, so now we're out in the garden, you can see the vast scale of this bike. It is absolutely huge, so it's no real wonder it didn't fit in the garage. But the first job I'm going to get on with is putting that mammoth 3-metre long shift cable on for the rear derailleur. And so the first thing I need to do is get the cable through the shifter itself to make sure it's around the mechanism and that it's actuating when I pull and push on the thumb shifters. Then feed the cable through the housing and then push that down through the little holes along the length of the bike to hold the housing. Next up is fitting the rear derailleur, which as you can see is a Tawny TX model. Tawny? No idea, but you know what it is. As I said before, this bike is a 1x7 speed, so it doesn't need anything too fancy, certainly doesn't need 105 or anything like that on it to get the rear shifting. Quick bit of indexing to make sure it moves back and forth properly and stops and starts at the right place. However, having done this, I later realised that I needed to take the cassette off and change it from the 9-speed that's on there to a 7-speed. So this was a complete waste of time. And then finally, just putting the last little bit of cable housing on to go into the rear derailleur. And that's shifting perfectly now. At least it would be if it was the correct cassette on there. And while I'm dealing with part of the drivetrain and shifting, I thought I might as well put the chains on next. I've got 3 of these 8-speed Shimano chains, and I'm going to have to connect 2 of them up to use between the cranks. I've mentioned this before as well, but it's always best to wipe off the excess engineering grease that comes in these chains. It's to stop it going rusty when it's being stored before it's been sold, but it will just absolutely suck up dirt and dust and grime and stuff as soon as you go out on it. So yeah, get yourself a bit of kitchen roll or a soft cloth and just wipe the chain down of any of that grease before you put it on. To put the chains together, I just used a standard Shimano quick link. And to make sure I didn't get any of that dust or grime on the chain in case I drop it as I'm putting it on, I used this old towel. I made sure it was an old towel. Please speak to your partner beforehand if you're going to do this, and just make sure you're not using one of the best towels. terms of sizing the chain between the two cranks, I just pulled the two ends together as close as I could and then cut the chain there. And then once you put the quick link on, you'll notice that there is quite a bit of slack in the chain, because there's obviously no derailleur or anything like that to take up that slack. But that's where this roller type gizmo comes into play. You slide it up, lock it in place, and then that takes up all the tension on the chain. So here I am with the third chain that goes from the rear crank to the rear cassette, and suddenly realised, yeah, that's the wrong size cassette. Let's go and get the 7-speed. So this is the Sunrace 7-speed cassette that I'm using. And because we're going down from a 9-speed to a 7-speed, we have to use a spacer behind the cassette. Now for a 9-speed to 7-speed, you need to use a 4.5mm spacer. So I bought this bundle of spacers that are different sizes that you can stack together. So I just used the 2 and 2.5mm one, bit of quick maths, 4.5mm. So that's the new cassette on, and while I had the wheel off, I decided to take the disc brake off because I wasn't going to use that anymore, and I thought it would probably make the bike look a little bit odd. So finally I can get back to actually putting the chain on the correct size cassette now. And to size the chain, I was going to use the usual big ring to big ring method of sizing it up, bypassing the derailleur. But as it turned out, the chain was exactly the right length anyway, so I didn't need to cut it, which was fairly handy. And once the quick link was put in, I gave it a quick test and it all worked. Perfect. And then the next job was to run the cable and housing for the rear brake, which was made really easy by these little loops that are placed along the length of the bike. And here's a graphic display of them here with the hose that I was having to put in for the hydraulic brakes the previous night, which I then had to rip out. And I forgot to mention earlier, but I'm actually using an old resin brake lever that I got from another project bike that I had in my garage, because obviously I couldn't use the hydro lever. So it's old, it's plastic, but it's black and it suits the purpose. Right, let's speed things along now. Seat posts and saddles. And then I forgot that I hadn't put the stem on for the rear set of handlebars, and because the seat post is only 25.4mm and the stem needs 28.6, I bought this little shim spacer to help take up that space. And then once I'd got the rear set of handlebars on, I realised that I'm probably going to need a higher raised set, because this is a beach cruiser and it's supposed to be a comfortable sit up and beg sort of ride, not a lean over, get into an aero position. So I will probably end up buying a similar set of bars to the ones at the front with a big raise on them, just to allow you to sit up a little bit further. Then one of the final jobs to do was just to bleed the brakes, and honestly this was a bit of a nightmare because none of the brake bleeding kit bits would fit the exact measurements of the calipers or either the levers, so this took a little while, but we eventually got there and the brakes are now working perfectly, thankfully. And then it was just little jobs to make the bike look very pretty and finish it off, such as these white handlebar grips, and I always struggle to get rubberized handlebar grips on. So my little tip here is to pour a tiny little bit of isopropyl alcohol inside, whoosh that around inside, and that will just help the grip slide on more easily, and because it's alcohol it will eventually just evaporate, leaving the grip on there nice and tight. And then the final job was these beautiful white wall tyres. Just marvel in their absolute beauty as I show them off. And with all that done, there was only one thing left to do, and that was the obligatory weigh-in. And if you've ever heard me moan about my 13 kilo gravel bike, wait for it, this one was 24.5 kilos. Wow. Okay, so now that we've completed the bike and we've weighed it, there's only one thing left to do, and that is to go through the costs. Not that this bike was ever meant to be a budget build, but I think it's always interesting to go through the costs of building something like this. Okay, so starting up the front, we have the headset, which was £10 from AliExpress. The brake levers and calipers, again from AliExpress, they were £48. Now, I obviously only used one of them in the end, but I still had to pay for both of them, so I'm going to add that into the costings. The 7-speed thumb shifter, again from AliExpress, that was £8, and the Tournay TX800 rear derailleur, that was £12, again from AliExpress. Something not from AliExpress were the tyres and the fork. They were both from bankruptbikeparts.com. The tyres were £30 for the two. The fork originally was £25, but then I paid an extra £10 to have it cut off to length and then an extra bit of thread added to make it fit this headset. So that was £35 in total. The extra long shift cable that I had to go and buy from Highway Cycles yesterday, that was £10. The two seat posts were £25 combined. The quill steerer was £18, again from AliExpress. The stem from AliExpress was £13, and the stem spacer here to allow it to go onto the narrower seat post, that was just £3 from AliExpress. Handlebars, AliExpress, £12 for the two of them, they were £6 each. The grips were from Amazon, they were £8. The saddles, AliExpress, £31. The chains, AliExpress again, were £21 for the three of them, just £7 each they were. So all of that added in together comes to a grand total of £299.50. Plus the 7-speed Sunrace cassette, which I completely forgot to add in, and that was £16 from Amazon. But again, this was never going to be a budget build. This was just about having fun, trying to build a tandem, never built a tandem before, trying to build it up, see how much fun I could have with it. It's been a bit of a nightmare along the way, I'll be honest. There have been some issues to overcome, but largely it's been pretty fun. And I'm now really looking forward to riding this, but I can't ride it alone. So there's only one thing left. Jimmy!
Oh, morning, Vicar. That is an absolute beauty.
Right, should we go for a ride?
I think we better have to, haven't we?
Whoa! Oh,
Get me off.
it takes a little bit of getting used to.
Do I have any control here?
No, unfortunately not. Oh my God! Your fate is in my hands. You have a go at the front.
3, 2, 1, go. Good.
Oh!
Right, go.
Oh God, I'm going again.
Are you on?
No.
Oh, we're flying now. I feel like I'm in a film. I feel like I'm in Mary Poppins.